There are 7 factors that make us overestimate the magnitude of risks. And those 7 factors were elucidated back in 1978, and I'll post a link down in the description so you can check out the original research. Those 7 factors in a nutshell are: number 1, if the magnitude of the risk is already tiny, we will tend to overinflate it. And the reverse is true as well. So if there's a risk which is pretty large, let's say climate change, we tend to underestimate that as well. The second one is if a risk is unfairly distributed. So if a particular demographic is disproportionately at risk compared to others, we will tend to think that risk is worse than it really is. And obviously it depends on how much we connect with that demographic, which is disproportionately at risk. Third, we will tend to overestimate the danger of new risks and underestimate the danger of old risks. Fourth, we will tend to fear artificial risks more than natural risks. Fifth, we'll tend to overfear things that have a delayed consequence because they cause us to dread the future, and that has negative impacts as well. So things like cancer has very long-term consequences which are slightly unpredictable. So that is something that we overestimate the risk of, whereas other things we will underestimate that have a more immediate impact. Sixth, risks that are imposed by others being perceived as greater than risks that are imposed by ourselves. So people are much more afraid of, say, terrorism because it's imposed by other people, whereas they're not really that afraid of smoking because they feel as if they're in control. They're the ones who are actually buying the cigarettes, putting them in their mouths. The 7th risk is when there's no visible benefit whatsoever to the exposure to a particular danger or an activity, we tend to overestimate the risk of that as well. So for example, azodicarbonamide in bread, consumers didn't really know what that was there for. It didn't say this is a bread leavening agent, it just had an unpronounceable name on the ingredients list. But if people actually knew the benefit of that ingredient, if they knew that the azodicarbonamide allowed those chains, those bakeries to make fresh products every day in store in such a quick time, in such large volumes, if they knew that that was the key ingredient that allowed that to happen, I think they might have a bit more understanding and a bit more sympathy for the ingredient being there. So these 7 factors dictate the magnitude of our overestimation of risks. Now let's actually apply a few examples to these factors. So first of all, we'll look at heart attacks first. Are unfairly distributed because they affect some people more than others. There are also no visible benefits whatsoever of a heart attack. So it ticks 2 of the 7 boxes for overestimating a risk. Now 2 out of 7 actually results in an underestimation of the risk of heart attacks, which is true. I mean, heart attacks are one of the biggest killers today, yet people still eat the way they eat, they still live the way they live. They don't seem particularly scared, in my opinion. So 2 out of 7 indicates that it's a reflection of an underestimation of the risk. Let's have a look as well at lightning strikes. 3 out of 7, it means that the fear is roughly in line with the magnitude of the risk. Let's look at 2 more just to illustrate this point. Let's look at shark attacks. Again, a tiny danger where the fear is about in line with the magnitude of the risk. It ticks 4 of those boxes. Azodicarbonamide and other chemicals though, any synthetic chemical in fact, tends to tick all 7 of those boxes. That's because synthetic chemicals added into consumer products are in tiny amounts that pose almost 0 danger. They are unfairly distributed because you have to choose to buy the product in order to be exposed. Yes, they're new. Yes, they're usually artificial. And if there are any consequences, there are not immediate consequences. Now, there's a massive benefit to the consumer, but it's not visible. And that's where chemistry outreach can bridge the gap. So 7 factors that make you overfear chemicals. Which chemicals do you overfear?